So have you ever started a bandana project and thought, oh no, this isn't what I really wanted to make? Well, don't worry, you're not alone, and in this video I'm going to show you five tips on how to create the most amazing bandana. Hi everyone, this is Selina. Welcome back to one of my videos. I hope you're well. If you're new to my channel, welcome. My name's Selina and I create crochet tutorials and crochet related videos. And today I'm bringing to you a new video on how to crochet a bandana and the beginner mistakes to avoid. So crocheting a bandana can be such a fun experience, but it can also be quite daunting. So today I'm going to go through five tips and tricks to create the best bandana possible. And as you can see, I am showing you this bandana from a few weeks ago, which is so pretty and perfect. The full tutorial is available on my channel. I'll be linking it in the notes and in the description box. There's also a free written pattern available for this that I will also be linking, but that is not the point of this video. I am just using this as a little example because to me this is the perfect bandana, and I just want you to be able to create the most perfect bandana for yourselves too. So yes, to begin with, the number one tip that I have for you is choosing your yarn and hook carefully. So like I said, the yarn choice is so important, and also the hook choice is really important to create the most perfect bandana. So for this golden apricot shade bandana, for example, I had used universal yarn, Vireo yarn, and this is 80% tencel, 20% wool, and this created the most drapey bandana I've ever crocheted because of the tencel and the wool. So it's kind of a nice mix in between, like a heavy kind of yarn, but also the wool adds a bit of lightness, so it just gives a beautiful drape once crocheted. This is what I have left of this yarn. So yes, that's a perfect choice of yarn. For example, it's an Aran weight, so that's like a medium 4 yarn, which is also a great weight for the yarn. I can also recommend a light 3 cotton yarn, which will give the same effect as the Vireo yarn. So for example, this is Drops Muscat, which is 100% cotton and mercerized cotton, and again, like I say, the cotton just gives a bit of heaviness, if that makes sense, compared to a more like acrylic based yarn, which will just not give the same drape. So that's my advice for the yarn choice. Also, I would stick to a DK light 3 weight or an Aran weight. Personally, I would not go under that weight yarn, a thinner yarn. I wouldn't go towards a thinner yarn, and I wouldn't necessarily go towards a chunkier yarn. As for the hook, I would choose a hook between 4.5mm to 5.5mm, and I would always go up a half hook size or a full hook size depending on the yarn usually. So if I'm using a light 3 weight yarn, I would use a 4.5 or a 5mm crochet hook, and if I'm using an Aran weight yarn, I would maybe go half a size up and go for a 5.5mm crochet hook. So those are just examples, but that will add to the drapiness of the project and give a looser tension. So that's my advice for the first point of the choice of yarn and hook. So point number 2 is the dreaded wonky triangle. So have you ever started a bandana project and halfway through you're wondering what's going on, why is my triangle all over the place? And that could be due to for example, forgetting to count your stitches. So if you're going from row to row, and for example, this is a great example of a bandana. It features a filet crochet design. So for example, the filet crochet row, if you skip a stitch, or if you forget to count how many stitches you need, or if you forget to chain one and skip a stitch, for example, you might end up with a strange looking triangle. So my advice is to always count your stitches and always take your time. Also, another point I would like to make is how big should be your triangle. So for my part, I always tend to keep to the same size for a triangle. I tend to have a larger triangle rather than a smaller triangle. Again, because once it's tied, I like the drapiness of a bandana. So if you look at this bandana without the border, it measures approximately 15 inches across and 8.5 inches, and this is excluding the border. So I would always stick to those measurements without a border, because I usually always add a border to my crochet projects, and so I always take that into account. So I would crochet a triangle in between 15 and 16.5 inches across, and that is obviously excluding the ties. And don't forget to turn your project from row to row, count your stitches, and be mindful of the size of your triangle. Point number 3 is, how do I tie my bandana? How do I create the ties? What do I do? How long should they be? So I created this bandana without any sewing. So this is a sewing free bandana, meaning that I integrated all the elements of the bandana as I was crocheting. So what I did, I crocheted the main part of the bandana, and then I created, I think, one tie, and I think this is, I chained 40, I believe, either 35 or 40 chains. You would have to check the pattern. And then I slip stitched, and then I think I did my border on one side, well, on both sides. And then when I reached the other side, I once again chained across and then slip stitched to create a tie before fastening off. So this is my little VIP trick that I do to avoid having to finish the project and then tie a piece of yarn, create the tie on both sides, and then faff around, so to speak, with lots of different loose ends. My little trick is to integrate the ties whilst you are working on the bandana. And if you take this bandana, for example, this is the perfect no-sew project, because I integrated everything as one, if that makes sense. So that's my little tip. And for the size of the ties, I always crochet the same size ties, and this tie is about 9 inches long, so this is what I recommend for each tie. Obviously you can make it slightly longer if that's your preference. I tend to keep my ties shorter because I don't want the ties to appear too much once the bandana is in my hair, if that makes sense. So that's my tip number 3. Tip number 4 is the edging. So to create the perfect bandana, you need to create the perfect edging that goes with your bandana. So for example, for this project, I absolutely wanted to create a border matching the filet crochet design. So I love the filet crochet design. It gives an airy look, a really, like in French you would use the word vaporeux, and vaporeux means drapey, ethereal, very drapey, and yes, like a vapor kind of vibe, if that makes sense. And I loved that. So adding a more structured border seemed to make sense. So that's why I added a very like present shell border. And I just love it. I just love the shell stitch edging. It just gives like that extra little edge and femininity to an otherwise very simple project, and I just love that. And I think when you are crocheting a bandana, adding a little bit of an edge or a little bit of a feminine touch with a border just makes all the difference. So keep that in mind when you are crocheting your bandana. What edging would you like to have? Number 5 is the finishing touches for your bandana. So obviously once you finished your bandana, you want to sew in all your loose ends properly. So this is a great example because you will only have 2 loose ends to sew in, because like I said, it was a no-sew project. And again, this is so important because, for example, at the beginning we would create a circle into which we will be, in my case, I fastened in my loose end as I went, and then what I do is I tighten the center at the beginning to create the most professional look, and then I fasten in the first loose end really properly so that the bandana doesn't unravel. So that's my tip. And also at the end, make sure that you fasten in your loose ends. If you are creating a bandana where you have not created your ties as you go, I definitely recommend adding your ties and then sewing in your loose ends properly. That will give a really neat look to this project. And most important of all, the biggest mistake one can make whilst crocheting is giving up too soon. So that's my number 1 tip. Never give up. Always persevere. I have frogged my project so many times and started them over, and I've never regretted that. And frogging means to unravel your project either partially or completely, and I have done that many times, and I'm so glad that I did because it gives such a neat look to the crochet project. If you've made a mistake or if you're just not happy with the look of a project, don't hesitate to persevere and recreate your project, if applicable, completely. So those are my tips. I hope you enjoyed this little video on how to crochet the perfect bandana and how to avoid beginner mistakes. Let me know in the comments if you've enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye bye.